It's book 19, The Champion Arms for Battle. And once again, Homer uses one of these beautiful poetic phrases to describe something as simple as sunrise. He says, "As dawn rose up in her golden robe from ocean's tides, bringing light to immortal gods and mortal men." Isn't that lovely? So Thetis arrives to deliver to Achilles the armor that's been made by Hephaestus, and she finds him still mourning and grieving for Patroclus, but she talks him up and into putting on the armor, which is impressive. Naturally, we saw that in the last book, and he gets fired up, which is a good thing. It says the other soldiers were unable to even look at the armor. It was so shining and blazoning, but Achilles takes it all in, and in the process gets very fired up. The more he gazed, the deeper his anger went, his eyes flashing under his eyelids, fierce as fire, exulting, holding the gods' shining gifts in his hands. And once he thrilled his heart with looking hard at the armor's well-wrought beauty, he turned to his mother, winged words flying. "Mother, armor sent by the gods, you're right. Only immortal gods could forge such work. No man on earth could bring it off. Now, by heaven, I'll arm and go to war." And the word spreads quickly through the ranks that Achilles is back, which fires everybody up, because this is very good news for that side. It says, "Welcome, rousing words," and Achaeans at arms roared out with joy to hear the great-hearted Achilles swearing off his rage. Yes, Achilles has finally worked out that it might be a better idea not to stay on strike and watch his whole side be destroyed. So with Achilles having made the statement that he's going to let bygones be bygones, despite the fact that Agamemnon did him wrong over the prize he had lost, namely the woman, Agamemnon now responds, and he blames the gods for letting him make those decisions. So everyone's sort of blaming somebody else. No one's taking ownership of anything here by the look of it. Specifically, he blames Ruin, the elder daughter of Zeus. Once again, you've got this personification of conditions, Ruin, which we wouldn't have thought of as a person, but clearly in this era and this style of writing, everything that happens is done by a person or a personified something, in this case Ruin. Ruin, the eldest daughter of Zeus, she blinds us all, that fatal madness, she with those delicate feet of hers, never touching the earth, gliding over the heads of men to trap us all. Then there's a bit of a debate as to what should happen next. Agamemnon is saying that we should wait, not charge into battle. We should bring all the treasures that were promised to Achilles to make good on that promise so he can see what's going on. Odysseus, ever the intelligent one, says, no, don't race into battle. Let's feed the men, get everybody strong and nourished again before we charge. And Achilles is not that keen. Achilles wants to get going now. As he says, "You talk of food. I have no taste for food. What I really crave is slaughter and blood and the choking groans of men." So, insanity prevails, and effectively they take Odysseus' advice. They do bring out all the treasures, both physical goods and 7 beautiful women, which was what was promised, and Briseis, of course, who's the girl in question. She made the 8th. So all is being put to rights and returned to Achilles, and indeed they also prepare the sacrifices and the feast to make sure that the soldiers are all well fed and nourished ahead of the battle. As Achilles says, "Go now, take your meal, the sooner to bring on war." And Achilles refuses all offers of food and nourishment and drink. It says, "But no comfort could reach the fighter's heart till he went striding into the jaws of bloody war." And so the forces muster for war. And in an unexpected development, the goddess Hera gives a voice to Achilles' horse, who's called Rowan Beauty. And Rowan Beauty says, "Yes, we will save your life this time too, Master mighty Achilles, but the day of death already hovers near, and we are not to blame, but a great God is, and the strong force of fate. Our team could race with the rush of the west wind, the strongest, swiftest blast on earth, men say. Still you are doomed to die by force, Achilles, cut down by a deathless god and mortal man. And with that sober reminder of fate, we end Book 19. So we're starting Book 20, called Olympian Gods in Arms. And Zeus has called what locally here we would call Indaba, which is a Zulu word for a big meeting of the clan. So he's called such a meeting for everybody to come to Mount Olympus, where he tells them to have at it, to take whatever side they want in the battle and do their darndest, because he's worried that left unattended, with Achilles now joining the battle, it's all going to go one way. And as he says here, now with his rage inflamed for his friend's death, I fear he'll raise the walls against the will of fate. So all bets are off, and the gods can meddle as much as they want. And so the gods meddle, and so the pace of the war picks up accordingly. But of course, it's effectively God versus God, so chaos is ensuing in the form of the personified strife. So immense the clash as the war of gods erupted. There, look, rearing against the Lord Poseidon, Phoebus Apollo loomed, bristling winged arrows, rearing against Ares, blazing-eyed Athena, rearing against Hera, Artemis with arrow of gold and cry that hallows the hunt. The goddess raining shafts, huntress sister of Phoebus, the distant deadly archer, rearing against Leto. Phoebus, described as urger of armies, talks to Aeneas, who's referred to alternatively as the son of Aphrodite and the son of Anchises, because I presume that's the two parents. He's encouraged to go against Achilles, even though he knows instinctively that that is not such a good idea. But he gets encouraged by the big talk, and then Hera identifies that he's gearing up for an attack on Achilles. She says, bend to the work, you two, Poseidon, Athena. Decide in your hearts how this assault will go. So, lots and lots of meddling. As Hera herself says, the gods are hard to handle when they come blazing forth in their true power. And Hera comments further, we swept down from Olympus, all to join this fight, so Achilles might not fall at Trojan hands today. Afterwards he must suffer what the fates spun out on the doomed fighter's lifeline, drawn that day his mother gave him birth. And a showdown is imminent, as it says, and now in the no man's land, two champions, greatest of all, strode and closed, both men burning for battle, Aeneas, son of Anchises, and brilliant Achilles. Achilles brilliant, of course, because he's wearing that golden armor that flashes even more than Hector's did. So the showdown occurs, and Achilles tells Aeneas not to take him on, and Aeneas lists his lineage as if to say, I'm not intimidated. And so their clash commences. But true to form, one of the gods intervenes. And this time it's Poseidon, who removes Aeneas from the battle, places him somewhere else within the fray, far from Achilles, and tells him that it's not his fate to die, and he should not be a silly soldier and not engage with Achilles, who's clearly outpowers him in the fighting stakes, and that he should wait until Achilles is dead before he engages, because there's no other Achaeans who can match him. And the god Apollo warns Hector, who's busy spurring up his Trojans, to hold back and wait for Achilles, not to surge forward. Hector is terrified to hear the voice of the gods. Achilles, not so much. He's charging around, killing whatever stands in front of him. As before, there's no subtlety to the narrative about the killing. As the Trojan charged head-on, Achilles speared him square in the brows. His whole skull split in half, and down he crashed. And next Achilles lunged at Demoleon, son of Antenor, a tough defensive fighter. He stabbed his temple and cleft his helmet's cheekpiece. None of the bronze plate could hold it. Boring through the metal and skull, the bronze spear point pounded. Demoleon's brains splattered all inside his casque, the Trojan beaten down in his fury. Next, Hector's youngest brother, Polydorus, decides to rush into the fight. He doesn't last very long because Achilles just spears him square in the back where his war belt clasped, golden buckles clinching both halves in his breastplate. Straight on through went the point and out the navel. Down on his knees he dropped, screaming shrill as the world went black before him, clutched his bowels to his body, hunched and sank. And Hector sees all this and forgets the advice to hold back about Achilles. Enraged by the sight of his brother having been killed by Achilles, he then decides to engage Achilles himself. And the two men are about to engage when again the gods interfere. In this case, Athena blows back the spear that was thrown by Hector before it reaches Achilles, and as Achilles charges, Phoebus whisks Hector away. So the gods are interfering, and it's anybody's guess. Achilles is very angry at Phoebus Apollo for interfering, and he shouts at Hector that this is not over, and we'll catch you later. Achilles, in his fury, stabs Dryops, and the next one up is Tros, Alastor's son, who begs for mercy, but as it says, here was a man not sweet at heart, not kind, no. He was raging, wild. As Tros grasped his knees, desperate begging, Achilles slit open his liver. The liver spurted loose, gushing with dark blood, drenched his lap, and the night swirled down his eyes as his life breath slipped away. This is followed by a litany of unfortunate Trojans, all of which receive Achilles' attention and feel various poetic ways of dying. The language again is so powerful, describing Achilles' unbridled fury. Achilles now, like inhuman fire, raging on through the mountain gorges, splinter dry, setting ablaze big stands of timber, the wind swirling the huge fireball left and right, chaos of fire, Achilles storming on with brandished spear like a frenzied god of battle, trampling all he killed, and the earth ran black with blood. Wow. And with that powerful piece of language, we end Book 20. So we start Book 21, which is called Achilles Fights the River. And Achilles is splitting the Trojans into two different directions. And the river Xanthus is raging and making it difficult for the Trojans. There's definitely an escalation in the fury of Achilles. If you thought he was tough before, this is a man possessed. Whirling in circles, slashing, and as soon as he takes some prisoners, it says, back he whirled, insane to hack more flesh. Here's a perfect example when he comes across Lycaon, one of the sons of King Priam, and he's got history with Achilles, where they've engaged before, and clearly there's no match. Okay, so it says, so the illustrious son of Priam begged for life, but only heard a merciless voice in answer. Fool, don't talk to me of ransom, no more speeches. Before Patroclus met his day of destiny, true, it warmed my heart a bit to spare some Trojans. Droves I took alive and auctioned off as slaves, but now not a single Trojan flees his death. Not one the gods hand over to me before your gates, none of all the Trojans, sons of Priam least at all. Come, friend, you too must die. No more Mr. Nice Guy. And as if to justify or soften the blow, Achilles makes the point that he too is destined to die in terms of the fate he has chosen for himself. He says, "Even Patroclus died, a far, far better man than you. And look, see how handsome and powerful I am, the son of a great man, the mother who gave me life, a deathless goddess. But even for me, I tell you, death and the strong force of fate are waiting. There will come a dawn or sunset or high noon, when a man will take my life in battle too, flinging a spear perhaps, or whipping a deadly arrow off his bow." And those are in fact the last words that Lycaon heard, because a moment later a sword flashes and he's dead, and the even meaner than before Achilles grabs his foot and flings him in the river. With the fired up Achilles shouting, "Die, Trojans, die, till I butcher all the way to sacred Troy. Run headlong on, I'll hack you from behind. Nothing can save you now, not even your silver-whirling, mighty-tiding river, not for all the bulls you've slaughtered to it for years, the rearing stallions drowned alive in its eddies. Die, even so, writhing in death, till all you Trojans pay for Patroclus' blood and the carnage of Achaeans killed by the racing ships while I was out of action." And a reference to Achilles' enormous strength and the fact that he carries a spear that basically only he can handle. He throws it, misses narrowly, and it digs itself into the bank, and his victim tries to pull it out to use back against him 3 times and is unable to move it at all. And just putting it into perspective, the death and destruction in the river gets so bad that the river, helped along by the gods, ends up taking the form of a human to appeal to Achilles to stop loading it with bodies because it's overwhelmed with bodies. "I'm choked with corpses and still you slaughter more. You blot out more. Leave me alone. Have done, Captain of Armies. I am filled with horror." And Achilles surprisingly agrees to do that. He'll keep killing, he just won't put them in the river. Very eco-friendly of him indeed. For a while, the narrative has been suggesting that Achilles may in fact be part godlike. It's never quite definitive, but the superhuman strength and all the exploits keep suggesting that, and that no human mortal is a match. And again, the phraseology they use here, where it says, "Down on the Trojan front, he swept like something superhuman." So there's this constant suggestion that either the gods are with him, or in fact he may be himself a little bit godlike. Scamander, one of Zeus's sons, embodies the river, and actually you end up with, as the book is called, Achilles actually fighting against the river itself, which is hard to conceptualize, but there it is. Again and again the brilliant swift Achilles whirled, trying to stand and fight the river man to man, and see if all the immortal gods who rule the vaulting skies were after him, putting him to rout. Again and again the mighty crest of the river, fed by the rains of Zeus, came battering down his shoulders, down from high above. But Achilles kept on leaping higher, desperate now, as the river kept on dragging down his knees, lunging under him, cutting the ground from under his legs. Both Poseidon and Athena intervene to help Achilles in his battle with the river. And still the Xanthus River keeps up the fight until Hera intervenes herself and calls Hephaestus to rain down his fire to ultimately destroy the river. And so the gods fight on their respective sides, each taking whichever side they prefer, and it just devolves into a complete melee of gods on gods, where powers are roughly equal, but this god claiming superiority over that god, and on it rages fairly pointlessly, while Achilles just busily mows down Trojans with his godlike strength. It's book 22, The Death of Hector. But this morning, we've got a friend. Say hello, Lily. Hey, Leela. Can't think of a more charming distraction. Okay, well, I guess it's just us then. Back to the book. The Trojans have all scampered back behind the protection of the gates of Troy, apart from Hector, who is standing his ground outside the gates. And the god Apollo is taunting Achilles to say, you know, in all your rage, you seem to have forgotten that I'm a deathless god, so not a good one to pick a fight with. And King Priam, who's watching Achilles' progress from afar, is greatly concerned for his son Hector, who he wants to get behind the protection of the gates, but Hector's having none of it. And in a further attempt to try and persuade Hector to come within the ramparts of Troy, his mother, I nearly called her Mrs. Priam, but in fact I had to look it up because it's not named in the narrative here. It's Queen Hecuba. She is Hector's mother, and she is wailing and trying to persuade him as well, but he is unmoved, literally and emotionally. Hector is determined. He says, "So now better by far for me to stand up to Achilles, kill him, come home alive, or die at his hands in glory out before the walls. Better to clash in battle now at once, see which fighter Zeus awards the glory." But for all this bravado, when Achilles finally arrives, Hector loses his nerve and starts to flee. But of course, Achilles is frequently referred to in this poem as the fastest runner, so fleeing is not a very good strategy. And by the time they had done 4 laps round the city itself, the gods watching from on high had had enough, and Zeus pulls out the scales and, as it says, placed 2 fates of death that lays men low, one for Achilles, one for Hector, breaker of horses, and gripping the beam mid-haft, the father raised it high, and down went Hector's day of doom, dragging him down to the strong house of death, and god Apollo left him. And even though the fate may have been determined, the game's still afoot, and those meddlesome gods, this time in the form of Athena, just can't leave things alone. So Athena rushes down, tells Achilles to take a pause, catch his breath, and she goes off in the form of Deiphobus, because of course these gods can assume different forms. Deiphobus seems to be another of Hector's many numerous brothers. Deiphobus then goes and talks to Hector and says, look, one-on-one's not working. Why don't we team up together? As you run round, we'll catch him. And they make a plan. So Hector suddenly feels, okay, he's got 2 guys on his side against Achilles. Maybe that'll level the playing field a bit. So Athena is taking the form, as gods can, and goddesses for that matter. Athena is taking the form of Deiphobus, one of Hector's many numerous brothers, and goes to him and suggests to him that they team up to trick Achilles and take him on 2 against 1. So Hector stands up to Achilles much more confident now, thinking he's got a partner in crime. Little does he know that Athena's setting up a trap for him. And he asks Achilles to agree that whoever wins the battle respects the other's body and returns it to its rightful owners. But again, Achilles is not in a negotiating mood. So Hector hurls his spear at Achilles, and it's glanced off the shield, and he calls confidently for Deiphobus to give him a second lance. And as it says, but the man was nowhere near him, vanished. Yes, and Hector knew the truth in his heart, and the fighter cried aloud, my time has come. At last the gods have called me down to death. So he's seen through the plan. And in a final attempt to go out in a blaze of glory, Hector rushes at Achilles and they clash, and predictably Achilles gets the upper hand. And as Hector sinks to his knees, he asks Achilles to again consider returning his body and not letting it just be left to the dogs. And once again, Achilles is not in a mood to make any concessions at all. In Achilles' own words, "The dogs and birds will rend you, blood and bone." And as Hector dies, the other Achaeans come rushing out. Achilles strips him of his armor, and the Achaeans all climb in with their spears. No love lost here. And so Achilles arranges to have Hector dragged through the streets behind a chariot. And of course, King Priam and Hecuba are beside themselves with anguish, to the point of almost rushing out of the gates themselves, but they're restrained by people who know better. And of course, eventually the news reaches Hector's wife, Andromache, and she completely collapses in grief, worrying about what her future and the future of her son, Astyanax, will be without Hector. And on that grieving note, we end Book 22. So Book 23 is called Funeral Games for Patroclus, and that's exactly what's happening. Achilles has led his troops back to the area of the ships where Patroclus's body is being kept safe, and preparations are underway to build a funeral pyre and do right by his body. And when he finally gets to sleep, Achilles is troubled by a dream in which a ghost appears to him representing Patroclus, reminding Achilles that his fate is also round the corner, to die beneath the gates of Troy, and asking that their bones be buried together. So Achilles is making all the arrangements for the funeral pyre, including the sacrifices, both animal and the 12 unfortunate Trojans who got brought along to be slaughtered, as part of the revenge, I guess, for Patroclus, but specifically not Hector. Hector had to be left for the dogs. But, little known to Achilles, Aphrodite makes sure that the dogs leave Hector's body alone. And Achilles gives instructions for Patroclus's bones to be removed from the pyre once the fires have died out, and to be kept for the time when Achilles' bones can be buried with them, to honor Patroclus's request. And then, as is custom, they started setting up for a series of games in honor of the fallen Patroclus. And Achilles makes the point that normally, if it had been anyone else, he would have participated and therefore won. But because it's Patroclus, he's going to sit this one out and let the other soldiers compete for the various prizes. And with shades of Ben-Hur in the back of my mind, the chariot races are underway. And the chariot race is fast and furious, with much jostling and arguing about who's in the lead, and eventually a prize giving, at which there's a little bit more jostling about who nudged who and who cut who off, but all seems to be resolved ultimately with everybody accepting fair play and reconciling. Next event in the games is the boxing match, then the wrestling match, and then the foot race, which the god Athena can't help interfering, effectively tripping up one of the runners. And then an event which involves full-on battle fighting, the prize being the armor that Patroclus had stripped from Lord Sarpedon. Next up, it's the shot put event, and then archery, and finally the spear throwing. And all of this wraps up the games in honor of Patroclus and brings us to the end of Book 23. So we reach the final book, Book 24, which is entitled Achilles and Priam. Achilles is still grieving the loss of his friend Patroclus, and the gods are still protecting Hector from the attack by any of the dogs, etc., by keeping him covered in a shroud. and the gods are squabbling about the correct treatment of Hector and whether they should intervene or not. Zeus ultimately decides that King Priam should pay a ransom, and that in exchange for that, Achilles should return the body of Hector to Priam. So Priam gathers up the requisite treasure and sets off to find the body of his son. In fact, the meeting between King Priam and Achilles goes well, as Achilles is keen to fulfill the wish of Zeus. And they prepare Hector's body so that King Priam doesn't see it until it's nicely anointed with the right oils, etc. And they even get King Priam to agree to sit down for a meal. So it's all terribly civilized for two sides that have been hacking each other to death. And King Priam is sitting having a supper with the man who killed his son. Strange how these things work. Achilles even agrees to hold off the warring for 12 days, which is what King Priam says he needs to give Hector a proper burial. So when both sides settle down to sleep, Hermes disturbs Priam and suggests that they leave discreetly before any other people in the Aegean camp discover that he's actually here, because they might not be as understanding as Achilles. So they leave discreetly. And they manage to get all the way back towards Troy before they're spotted by Cassandra, King Priam's daughter, who screams at the sight of Hector being transported on this bier. And that sets off uncontrollable grief again from the women of Troy. And Priam gives the order for the funeral procedures to be undertaken. And indeed, Achilles keeps his word, and no action is taken against the Trojans for the next 12 days. And as the poem finalizes in its last line, it says, "And so the Trojans buried Hector, breaker of horses." And that is the end of not just book 24, but the end of the Iliad. What an amazing reading experience. Well, hello BookTube. It's Saturday, the 24th of January. That means it's 24 days since I started reading the Iliad. And I promised myself I would read one book of each of the 24 books in each of the days of January until I finished. So, I've finished the Iliad. This is a real milestone for Raff's reading renaissance. This really is one of the great books of the literary canon that one, in my view, simply cannot ignore. It needs to be experienced. And having read it, I can confirm that there's your life before you've read the Iliad and your life after you've read the Iliad, and they're never quite the same. So, I'm very pleased I did it. I'm very grateful to the many people who sort of made the journey a little bit easier for me. Primary among those is Steve Donahue, who agreed to be my reading buddy and chat to me along the way. And I think he's massively enriched my enjoyment and understanding of what I'm reading. So I'm very grateful to him indeed for that. A second person I'd like to thank is the translator of this work, Robert Fagles, because of course Homer wrote in very ancient Greek, nearly 3,000 years old Greek, which is not something I can tackle. So Robert Fagles has worked very hard, and Steve confirmed that Fagles does a lot of the heavy lifting to make this story come alive in a language that we modern readers can understand. I'd also like to give a shout out to Bernard Knox, who writes the introduction to this book, the forward and notes, because he provides a historical context and a cultural context, which I found extremely useful. And as I mentioned somewhere in the video, unlike normally where I avoid those introductions for fear of spoilers, in this case I would heartily recommend it to you. So, some key takeaways from the reading experience. First of all, human beings have not changed very much in 3,000 years. We're just as messed up, as jealous, as lustful, as egotistical, and all of those things then as we are today. So the blueprint hasn't changed very much. The gods, to the extent that they exist, are meddlesome and no better behaved than the humans. Steve made the point that even today we live with some gods in our world who stride across the globe like colossuses and tell the rest of us how we're going to live. So not a lot's changed there either. The other takeaway for me is that Homer, much like Tolstoy, who I had the joy to read a little while ago, is simply a master at capturing the human being and its foibles. There's a real skill to capturing the essence of humanity in stories such as these. Another takeaway for me is that great literature that has stood the test of time is great for a reason. And we should, when we want to find great literature to read, we should seek out some of these works that just have been on the bestseller list, frankly, for 3,000 years. That's a good proposition. It's never gone out of fashion. People just keep reading it. And the reason for that is it is such a stunningly good story. But again, I have to give credit, whether it's the translator or Homer, I can't really judge. But the writing is immersive. I have never read a work of literature that made me feel so much like it was my blood that was being spilt. It was my sweat and my toil in the battles that was being raged. As I said to Steve on one occasion, at the end of one of the books, I really felt like I needed to go for a shower. It was that immersive. It grips you from the start. It's a powerful story, and it is an absolute experience to read. I cannot recommend enough for people who are daunted by it. You need to listen, not to me, I'm not the expert, but listen to the experts who put this book as number one. I have around me many books on what is the great literature, what should we read. They all start with the same comment. They all say, number one, the Iliad. I would say, for example, I've read Gilgamesh, which I think claims to be the oldest. It's not a shadow of this. If you have a choice of this or Gilgamesh, read the Iliad. Life is too short, so don't read rubbish. Choose carefully, read great stuff. And if you think my literary taste is worth taking any note of, I think this is fantastic. I would also say another learning for me is to invest a little bit of research and time before tackling the big classics, even if it's just Wikipedia level research. But do a bit of work to find out about the context, the time, the history, if there's a story or a battle. It hugely enriches the experience as you go through it. And perhaps the most important thing of all that I want to emphasize as I continue on my journey is that reading is supposed to be joyful. Have fun. This is not supposed to be a slog. It's not supposed to be, no one's saying you have to do it. We do it because we love reading. And the more I read, the more I love reading. So that's the reason to keep doing it. I want to then say thank you to all of you who've stayed the course and journeyed with me on this particular leg of my Riff Raff's reading renaissance. If you've enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already done that. And for those of you who find my erratic posting schedule tricky, maybe just ring the bell so that you always know when I've put something out. But in any event, I'm so glad you stayed with me, and I'm proud of you for doing that. I hope if you have read this before, I hope you've enjoyed watching my ramble through the experience of reading it. If you haven't read it yet, I hope maybe I've inspired you to think very seriously about it. But in either event, I hope you enjoy whatever you choose to read, and I hope we'll see you again very soon. So bye-bye now.